I just work straight through the holidays, sometimes all night long. You can bet.
In the wreaths. So we have our Rockland County Executive Ed Day. We have our Rockland County District Attorney Tom Walsh. We have our Rockland County Sheriff Lou Falco. We have Clarkstown Councilman Patrick Carroll. Clarkstown Councilman Mike Graziano. We have our Town Clerk Justin Sweet. Our Highway Superintendent Bob Malone. And our New York State Senator David Carlucci. Also representing the Clarkstown Police Department is our Captain Jeff Promenade. This time we're going to have the presentation of the colors by the Clarkstown Police Honor Guard. I'd ask everyone to please stand.
Present arms!
We gather this day as a grateful people and a humble nation. As a nation, we are aware that our freedoms can be easily spoken of, but at the same time must be fought for and preserved in times of testing and travail. We gather today to honor the countless men and women down the decades who have come forth to serve our nation in the cause of freedom and fought for the preservation of those freedoms enumerated in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. Help us to hold in our hearts the men and women of our time who, in the footsteps of soldiers past, are now serving our nation in the armed forces throughout the world. In times past, we have always seen our heroes as men and women who served our nation in the military. But these past 2 months, you've expanded our vision to see that there are the front lines overseas and that there are the front lines right here at home, fighting for our freedom from the coronavirus pandemic. We embrace all those in the fields of science and medicine who are our heroes today. Doctors and nurses and therapists who have given their lives to save others. Marching into battle against COVID-19, they have become our hero warriors. For all men and women who have served our nation in the past wars, and this present war against the coronavirus, we salute you, we honor you, we hold you precious in prayer and memory. Bless this gathering as our community honors the men and women who gave and give their lives for our nation. Let us hold them close to our hearts and our prayers this Memorial Day weekend.
This time Ava Aston will sing the Star-Spangled Banner.
Colors, present, hark!
Oh, see, can you to see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets regular, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Color.
We are not able to gather this Memorial Day, but we have not forgotten our fallen. In the past years, this country has been so wonderful, and this county, with remembering those that we have lost during Memorial Day. There were parades and ceremonies. There was just something going on in every town. I was kept quite busy, going from event to event. And I was so pleased with the sentiment and the attendance at each event. Memorial Day is a difficult time of year for families of our fallen, but also a difficult time for most veterans, myself included. What I realize now, with the changes for this year, is that this year is so much harder for me because I have more time to reflect. So my message is for our Gold Star families and for veterans. When we go into the military, we leave our homes, families, and everything that is familiar to us, and we are swept into training with strangers and unfamiliar places far away from home. We are challenged mentally and physically, and we are asked to do dangerous things. We learn to not only rely on ourselves, but on the people around us. We develop a trust, a bond with our other service members because our lives depend upon each other. We have a commitment to a higher purpose. This makes a relationship that is like family. Although those bonds are formed quickly, they are deep and lasting. When someone we serve with dies, we feel an incredible loss. It is often complicated. There are feelings of grief, guilt, confusion, let alone if it happens to be suicide. When you are young and you think you're invincible, it is hard to make sense of such tragic deaths. For years, I would have these times that I would seem to feel down. And I couldn't explain it. It just seemed to descend upon me like a dark cloud. And the sadness would stay with me a short time, and then it would pass. I didn't understand. I started talking to other veterans and to my VA therapist, and what I learned is that although my conscious mind doesn't keep track of dates, there's a part of me that does. And those sad periods were actually anniversaries of the lost dates of some of the people that I served with. Realizing this, I now know what I need to do. I need to mourn. This is complex grief. I was remembering the losses throughout the year of those anniversary dates. But Memorial Day is the day when I remember all of them. I have a quick story to share with you. When I first got to my unit, I had a warrant officer that was my instructor pilot. Now I learned how to fly in flight school, but to become a combat pilot and able to do combat missions, it's really that first instructor pilot that teaches you everything and makes you the pilot and do the combat. He continued to serve after I got out. I was medically discharged, and he continued to serve for many years. And he deployed several times to combat zones over the years. So several years ago, one Memorial Day on a Monday, my phone started getting alerts. It was him. He was sending out every half hour a message. Each message had a name or names and military rank. After a few alerts, I realized what this was. They were the names chronologically of the people that he had served with who had died. These were aircraft crashes. The alerts continued all day. That is a lot of loss. When you think of it, one service member, one career, it's a tremendous loss. But he was paying tribute to them, as you are here today. So I want to thank the leaders, the community, and all the civilians this week that have been calling me, asking what we can do to pay tribute. You are paying tribute. You honor them well, and I thank you. For the families that lose their loved ones in the service, they live with the loss every day. But know this, on Memorial Day, someone, somewhere in the world that served with your loved one is also remembering. I want you to know that you are not alone. Although we are not gathering in cemeteries or on the streets in our towns, they are not forgotten. There are many virtual ceremonies this weekend. If you go to the VA website, all of the VA cemeteries are doing a virtual wreath laying. IAVA has asked us to take a moment of silence at 3 o'clock on Monday to honor those that we've lost. And I also want to invite everyone to the county veteran cemeteries here in Hoehmann. If you would like to pay your respects, we invite you. There is a flag placed at each veteran's grave. In the cavalry, which is what my unit was when I was in the Army, we have many traditions. One of them was to always have a rendezvous point. I have a rendezvous point for after death. We have a final rendezvous point, and it's called Fiddler's Green. And there's a historic poem written about it, which I'm not going to read to you today. But you can look it up. It's called Fiddler's Green. It was written right after the Civil War. So to my cavalry troopers, gentlemen, I'll see you on the green. To everyone else, have a safe Memorial Day. Thank you. Scouts out.
I've been mulling a quote over for some time in preparation for today, and it goes like this. They say that you die twice. Once when you stop breathing, and the second, sometime later on, somebody mentions your name for the last time. I'll come back to that quote in just a few moments. Today and throughout this weekend, we remember our fallen American soldiers. As the notable song we just heard performed by country music superstar Toby Keith describes the men and women who stepped up, served, and yes, many of whom died. The song speaks for so many American soldiers, including those who are now largely forgotten and only faint echoes of history from a distant past. American soldiers who, whenever liberty was in jeopardy, laid their life on the line. So who were these American soldiers who paid the ultimate sacrifice? History records that 86 Rockland residents served and died in the military during World War I. I've chosen to focus just on a couple of those soldiers from that era, given that they faced not only a military enemy of the time, but a silent and even more deadly enemy, a pandemic known as the Spanish flu. Allow me to share briefly about a few of these American soldiers from Clarkstown who paid the ultimate sacrifice. Albert W. Kerr was born on January 19, 1892, in New City. The son of John and Annie Kerr, he spent his youth growing up not too far from this very location. He was a brakeman for the railroad. His service record said that he was tall, of medium build with brown hair and blue eyes. In February of 1917, he married his sweetheart, Lillian Harper. One can envision Albert enjoying life as a newlywed while serving as a brakeman on the local railroad that ran from Haverstraw down to Hoboken. Believe it or not, in 1917, one could take the train from New City at the station directly across from Town Hall and arrive in Hoboken in just under an hour. Unfortunately, life as a newlywed working on the railroad did not last long, as Albert was inducted into the Army on February 18, 1918. He would serve in the 77th Division, the 306th Infantry. He did his training at Camp Upton in Suffolk County, and less than 2 months later, on April 16, shipped out to England and finally to France. He saw action in the Second Battle of the Marne, which was one of the last major offensives by the German Army in mid-July to early August 1918. Imagine that time frame, if you will. Exactly 5 months from New City to the first day of combat on the front lines in France. He would also participate in the Meuse-Argonne Offensive, the deadliest battle in American history, which lasted from late September to the last day of the war, November 11th. That battle resulted in over 350,000 casualties. The 306 saw significant action, and elements of the 306 were part of the famous Lost Battalion, which had advanced to take Hill 198, only to learn that the surrounding Allied forces had not advanced, leaving them surrounded by the Germans and ultimately lost. They suffered friendly fire from artillery and huge losses on the battlefield. As a result of the offensive, 7 members of the Lost Battalion were awarded the Medal of Honor for extraordinary heroism and bravery. The division history reports that the 306 took particularly heavy casualties on October 5th, 1918. 47 men were wounded, 1 officer and 2 enlisted men were killed that day. Among these was Albert Kerr, an American soldier from New City. The military dispatch recording his death was short and succinct. Albert Kerr, killed on or about October 5th, 1918, died while being transferred to the hospital for treatment. Company G 306 had lost most of their men at the river, and Albert Kerr was transferred from Company F to Company G to reorganize the company. During the advance in the Argonne front, he was killed by machine gun wounds. Henry Steinman, formerly Company E 306, commanding. Albert's service record reveals his wife was notified and his body was buried in the American cemetery in France. After the war, the Nyack Evening Journal recounted a welcome home dinner celebrating returning American soldiers. It records that 45 men from New City went to serve their country in the Great War, and only 1 from New City was lost, Albert W. Kerr, an American soldier, gone and not forgotten. Adam Ruppel was a Spring Valley boy through and through. He and his family resided in the Spring Valley section of Clarkstown, where he was born on October 18, 1894, to parents John and Elizabeth Ruppel. He entered military service on September 22, 1917. His service record states that he did his basic training at Camp Dix in New Jersey and shipped out to France on January 20th, 1918. He was a member of the 3rd Company of the 4th Provisional Regiment of the 18th Division. He was assigned to the front and developed acute peritonitis. He died on April 29, 1918. A heartbreaking but moving letter was written by an American Red Cross nurse, Maud Cleveland, and sent to his mother after his death. A portion of it reads as follows. Dear Mrs. Ruppel, before this you have heard that your son has died here for his country in France. I'm writing for the Home Communication Services and the American Red Cross to tell you the details which could not be included in the official message. Your boy became ill at the front and was brought by ambulance to the Hotel Dieu, a large and excellent French hospital in Beauvoir. He had acute peritonitis. He came in at about 7 o'clock on the evening of April 28th. He was put in a ward with 2 other American boys and was waited upon all night by Sister Eugenie, a sweet-faced, kindly sister of charity. In spite of all the doctor could do for him, he sank into a coma toward dawn and died at 7 in the morning of April 29th. That afternoon, I went with Sister Eugenie to see him in the chapel of the hospital. She gave me his Bible, which she had kept for you, and told me that he had asked for you just before he became unconscious. She was especially anxious to tell me that he died quietly with no pain, just as if he were going to sleep, she said. The letter goes on in great detail to describe the funeral service and also notes that there were a large group of French women there as well who were also mourning their own husbands and their own sons. The letter concludes quite movingly as follows. The minister spoke very beautifully at the grave and said that this brave young American had died not only for his country, but for France and for the freedom of the world. I enclose a notice of your son's death from the local paper. I'm sending you also a package of his things, including his Bible. I extend my deepest sympathy for your share of the service which so many women have borne. As one American woman to another, I congratulate you upon being given the ability to give us such a wonderful son, loyally for our country. One has to ask how many letters of that nature Maud Cleveland and countless other Red Cross nurses and volunteers have written and sent to a mother, a father, a brother, a sister, a husband, or a wife, to commemorate the life of yet another American soldier. Sometime later, his remains were transported home to Clarkstown, where they were interred at Hoehmann Cemetery in New City. Adam Ruppel, an American soldier from Clarkstown, gone but not forgotten. There was also John Ingalls, who was the youngest son of Edward and Sarah Ingalls, who was born in Valley Cottage on April 19, 1897. He lived in Central Nyack. He was a member of the Central Nyack Fire Department and shipped out to France in 1918. He was promoted to the rank of corporal, serving at the front from July of 1918 with the 326th Signal Battalion. The Nyack Evening Journal has several brief front-page articles announcing his death on April 28, 1918, just 2 weeks before the end of the war. He died from pneumonia as a result of the Spanish flu. The articles recount his death, that the firehouse is, quote, draped in mourning out of respect for its late member. His parents purposed to have his remains brought home. All of just 21, John Ingalls, an American soldier from Clarkstown, gone but not forgotten. And perhaps the most poignant story that I came across was that of Hilton Smith, the youngest son of John and Carrie Smith. John was a grocer in West Nyack, and Sarah, his wife, was a seamstress. Hilton himself was a chauffeur. He enlisted in the Army at the age of 23. He married Mary Hogan of Boisville on August 24, 1918. A week later, on September 1, 1918, he was inducted into the Army and sent to New Hampshire to train for war. He never made it overseas, dying on October 6, 1918. His service record indicates that he died of complications from the Spanish flu at Camp Durham in New Hampshire. We are at a very interesting and deeply challenging time in our history. Our nation is in the throes of another once-in-a-generation, once-in-a-century crisis. The thriving economy of just 3 short months ago is shuddering under the weight of a nationwide shutdown, born of another terrible pandemic. Unemployment is at the highest level since the Great Depression, and millions fear what lies ahead. The past 3 months have been marked by isolation, frustration, fear, and uncertainty. Business owners question if they will survive and be able to reopen. A terrifying new disease with no known cure has taken the lives of over 95,000 Americans. In short, recent events have rocked the very fabric of our world, offering many to question if life is changing permanently and forever. It would all seem so desperate and even hopeless if we had not been through all of this before. Indeed, the parallels between today and a forgotten era of just over 100 years ago are frankly eerily similar. In 1917, the United States was at war and in 1918 through 1919 faced a once-in-a-century pandemic. It is said that over 50 million people died from that pandemic worldwide. Nearly 1/3 of the soldiers from Rockland County who died in World War I died not from German bullets, but rather from the Spanish flu. The sacrifices we as people are making right now are strikingly similar to those that were made back then. But frankly, they pale in comparison to what that generation faced, survived, and ultimately thrived. Today, thanks to our healthcare workers and first responders, our outcomes are far better, and life will soon return to some degree of normalcy. One thing that has not changed, however, is our respect and our admiration for our American soldiers. The men whom I briefly shared information about here today. We will never forget the sacrifice of Arthur Kerr, Adam Ruppel, John Ingalls, and Hilton Smith, and countless other American soldiers who counted up the cost and said yes, giving their lives so that we may remain free. To say that this Memorial Day weekend is vastly different is a tremendous understatement. Gone are the parades, the ceremonies, the barbecues, family gatherings, and baseball games. In solitude, with social distance, this Memorial Day, we pause and reflect on the example set before us. Throughout this weekend, I ask that you reflect upon these gallant souls and all the American soldiers who have died that we might live. As we started, so let us conclude by remembering so that the words about a man dying twice are not and will never be true for our beloved American soldiers. Yes, these are challenging times, but they're also a time of hope, inspiration, that we derive from the example set from that crisis of long ago. Let us remember the fallen and be eternally grateful for all that we indeed have and continue to treasure. Thank you. God bless you. This time we're going to have Father Bill Cosgrove again from St. Augustine's, who will lead us in a closing prayer. He'll be followed by Ava Aston singing God Bless America. Please stand.
For a land so fair, as we raise our voices in a solemn prayer. God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above, from the mountains to the prairies, to the ocean. God bless America.
Supervisor Hoehmann, can you just explain why it was so important to have the ceremony today?
You know, with everything shut down and the inability to have parades and the typical ceremonies traditionally that we have, it was critically important for us to be able to commemorate our fallen. This is such an important day, Memorial Day and the weekend, so we wanted to make sure that we paid due honor and respect with some speeches and with military honors and placement of wreaths before all the monuments commemorating our war dead.
And can you just talk about a little about how you set it up with social distancing and, you know, regulations?
Sure. So you can have these ceremonies. We had seats for 10 of our elected officials. They took the place of our veterans to be able to place the wreaths, and we also had our Clarkston Police Honor Guard. They were off on both sides in the wings to commemorate and offer full military honors, the rifle volley and taps. So very, very special for us, you know, and it turns out it'll probably be one of the only ones here in Rockland County that's actually live. We streamed it, and we just encourage everybody to please get out and go visit a cemetery, or just have positive thoughts for those that paid the ultimate price for our nation.